to the new show. Today I was going to talk about the 1956 movie Invasion of the Body Snatchers. But before I started making this video, I took a nap, and when I woke up I just thought it would be a really silly idea. So there's no video today. In the early 50s, sci-fi author Jack Finney wrote a serialized science fiction horror story called The Body Snatchers, about a small California town being menaced by alien invaders who reproduced from plants, duplicating a human host and then destroying that host. And although it didn't set the science fiction community ablaze, noted science fiction author and editor Damon Knight, at the time of its release, thought it was a preposterous and silly story, it nonetheless captured the imagination of readers and would be made into a motion picture in 1956 by director Don Siegel, working for Allied Artists. In the decades since its release, its pop culture significance cannot be overstated, and Invasion of the Body Snatchers would be remade several times, perhaps most notably in 1978 by director Philip Kaufman. It's hard to think of any other B movie, let alone B science fiction movie, that's inspired so much discussion about what the film means. And today, I'm going to take a whack at it. So here are my 3 things you should know about Invasion of the Body Snatchers from 1956. Number 1, Exhaustion. Invasion of the Body Snatchers was made for about $400,000 on a shooting schedule that was a little under 3 weeks. Being on such a tight schedule meant no time for rehearsals, no time for reshoots, no time for retakes. Every scene you see in this film was the first take. They simply didn't have the time or money to go back and do it again. There was also no time to do optical process shots, so all of the practical effects had to work correctly the first time, including the famous greenhouse scene where we first see the pods bursting open and their human doubles flopping out. That was all done on a soundstage on the first take. So this was a shoot that was somewhat exhausting and nerve-wracking for everyone involved, especially actor Kevin McCarthy, who, during the final week or so of shooting, had to spend all his time on his feet, running around. He complained, among other things, about getting Charlie horses a lot. And during the climactic scene on the highway, where he's yelling at the passing cars that they're here, they're already here, you're next, McCarthy was apparently so exhausted during that scene from having been up all night the night before that director Don Siegel told all the stunt drivers of the vehicles to be extra careful because he wasn't sure if Kevin McCarthy might fall down and get hit by a car inadvertently. Number 2, changes and edits. Jack Finney's original novel actually had a light ending. The alien pod people eventually give up when they realize how strong the human capacity for resistance is. Screenwriter Daniel Mainwaring had a different take on the ending, where the movie would end with Dr. Bennell rushing through traffic, warning people that the aliens were coming, passers-by seemingly ignoring him, fade to black. Well, the head of Allied Artists, Steve Broidy, didn't like that at all, and demanded that Mainwaring and Siegel come up with a wrapper story to put around the film, to give it a more hopeful ending. Both Siegel and Mainwaring were extremely opposed to doing this, but ultimately conceded to the request in the hopes that they could salvage the film. The reshot opening ending scenes were in fact done so late, all the processing and titles for the films had already been made, so none of the actors in that scene are listed. The ending wasn't the only thing Allied Artists head Steve Broidy wasn't happy with. The original screenplay, following Finney's novel, had contained a lot more of his trademark humor. Nowadays, humorous scenes in horror movies are a no-brainer. They give the audience a chance to catch their breath, let them mentally switch gears so that they can go back into being scared. But at the time, it was considered very improper. Don Siegel wanted to keep the humor in the film and showed a rough cut to an audience and took a tape recorder with him specifically so that he could record the audience's reactions of laughing and then shrieking and then laughing later on, in the hopes, if he played it back for Steve Broidy, that he would understand that the audience was entertained. Well, apparently when Broidy found out about this, he blew his top and demanded that the humor be cut out because there's no place for jokes in a horror movie. Actor Kevin McCarthy also had general complaints about the script. McCarthy was a fan of the book and thought that too much of the dialogue had been dumbed down unreasonably. Reading other interviews with McCarthy from the time, one gets the feeling that he felt that this movie was going to be a step down in his career, this B science fiction thriller that the studio heads kept tampering with. In hindsight, it's funny how wrong he was about the film's popularity and its lasting cultural impact. Number 3, Capgras Delusion, Communism, McCarthy. What's it all about? Capgras Delusion is a mental disorder that specifically applies to people who have had certain kinds of brain injuries and lesions of the brain tissue. The symptoms are that the person thinks that people they know are being replaced by duplicates, who are more often than not malevolent. It was often thought to be a symptom of schizophrenia until it was determined around the early 1980s to specifically do with brain damage. Whether Capgras Delusion actually figured in Jack Finney's original story, I don't know, but I thought it was an interesting bit of trivia. Don Siegel and Kevin McCarthy have always maintained that Invasion of the Body Snatchers did not have a subtext about communism. That was something people read into it because of the times. It is worth noting that screenwriter Daniel Mainwaring had had some run-ins with the government during the Red Scare, so he may have definitely injected the tone of the communist witch hunt, if not deliberately pointing a finger at it. Now, the reason Joe McCarthy is important here is, in my opinion, not so much because he promoted the communist scare. It's the fact that McCarthy was on television. And this was an unprecedented thing at the time, that a senator with really paranoid radical ideas about communists infiltrating America was suddenly an overnight sensation. And his message was going everywhere because of television. The 50s were a simpler time, they were a less cynical time. Many Americans didn't have the luxury of speculating on whether or not what McCarthy was saying was actually true. People just kept hearing about it. So with regard to Invasion of the Body Snatchers, my feeling is not so much that the film is a reflection of communism as much as it is a reflection of people's reactions to communism, people's reactions to hearing about the threat of communism. While the threat that this man posed to the United States and its government grew larger, people, on the whole, were mostly keeping quiet at first. Invasion of the Body Snatchers does reflect that. But I think there's also a much simpler core fear that Invasion of the Body Snatchers deals with. And it's an experience I think almost any human being can relate to. It's that moment when, for seemingly no reason, a family member, a friend, a co-worker, someone you care about, suddenly turns on you and doesn't treat you the same way anymore. And this person who once seemed to us full of life suddenly becomes a blank void. Whether it's from drug addiction, sexual abuse, or maybe the trauma of having been in war, the person we identified with is gone and replaced by a blank. And I think that's a bit of real life horror that's all too common. And I think it's what Jack Finney was really getting at. Regardless of what the film's actual themes are, I still think the most chilling thing about watching Invasion of the Body Snatchers today is this repeated motif where concerned townspeople come to Dr. Miles Bennell, trying to tell him that something is terribly wrong, and then suddenly becoming silent and blank. It's that idea that the invasion happened while you weren't looking, and now it's too late to gather evidence, and there's only time to run. I think that's one of the most effective things about Body Snatchers as a horror film, that it goes from disquieting to quiet. That wonderful lull in the middle where everything seems to have gone back to normal, except it hasn't. The idea that when you stop hearing dissent is when you should get scared. That structure really gives the film its uniqueness. But a little bit of trivia, one thing I didn't know about this film is that Invasion of the Body Snatchers was released in a 1:2 format called Super Scope, which was widescreen for the time. Except the film was originally shot in a ratio of 1 to 1.85, which corresponds to the 4:3 television image we're used to looking at. So basically, after this film was processed, they cropped off the top and bottom of the frame to make it wider. If you know that going in, you can see that a lot of the framing seems oddly tight. This was another change made by the studio at the last minute that Don Siegel couldn't do anything about. So, would I recommend Invasion of the Body Snatchers, 1956? Of course, it's a seminal science fiction classic. And honestly, given how much of the film was altered and tampered with during the process, and considering the limitations they had to work with, I think it's pretty remarkable that it went on to be such an important piece of cinema, regardless of the issues. It put a cold finger on a nerve of something Americans couldn't see and weren't talking about, and I think it still does. So what do you think of Invasion of the Body Snatchers? Do you like the sequels? Which is your favorite? Let me know in the comments below. And if you like what you heard, hit the like button and subscribe, and consider becoming a patron of the new show. I could use your help. Alright, this is Random Rob, signing off till next time. Be excellent, and take care. The new show is made possible by generous support from viewers like Tony, Arnell, Skipnick, Christopher, Marion, Eric, and B. Thank you so much for your support.